A car company that I'm sure you're aware of is very, very French in that while it surrendered multiple times, it did go on to give us some massive innovations that stand up there with the baguette, the white flag and smelly cheese. I'm of course talking about Citroen, a company founded by an engineer at his heart who wanted to go into a world of cost doesn't matter engineering innovation where comfort, quirkiness in design and absolute innovation were at the forefront. This was a company that itself survived multiple bankruptcies and also helped a French president survive. This is Citroen, this is Current and Combustion. I'm Jason Hassett and welcome to Storytime. Hey, so you might be wondering why for the entirety of this video there's a big yellow background that says Current and Combustion. Well, let me explain real quick and then we'll get back to the video, and you can skip this if you want because it's not really that important. It's just for some context for those of you who are wondering. Basically, I took a 4-year break from this channel, set up another channel where I did F1 news and F1 content, which got 17 something thousand subscribers, then started documentaries, and then started realizing that I missed doing automotive content. I tried publishing it on the rebranded version of the F1 channel. Turns out F1 people don't give a flying, well, you know, about automotive content in general, and I figured why not revive this channel. So the first 5 or 6 or 7 or 9 videos on this channel are going to be basically ones that were originally on that channel that then I cross-posted to here. So that kind of explains it. I guess that's all there is to say. Now let's jump back to the video. This week we've got a jewel of a company which I'm actually really excited to dive into because I have a kind of a superficial level knowledge of this company, and over the last few days I've been looking into a variety of things from their history. Of course, I'm getting all my information from the internet, don't have time to dive into books and so on. So if I get anything wrong, or if there's something that you find really interesting that I've missed, please do leave it in comments. But this is the entire history of Citroën, as we call them in Ireland. And our story begins this week in 1878 in Paris, where André Citroën, as normal people would call him, was born to Dutch Jewish immigrant parents, or Polish Jewish immigrant parents. Yes, his father was Dutch Jewish and a diamond merchant. That's not a word. Diamond merchant, his father, and his mother was Polish Jewish. His father, unfortunately, 6 years later, at the age of 6, took his own life under financial strain. And Andre's life would continue to be one of financial strain, starting obviously quite difficult at the age of 6. But he turned out to be highly intelligent and highly ambitious and went on to study engineering at the prestigious École Polytechnique, which is the Polytechnic, as we'd call it in Ireland, graduating in 1898, just at the turn of the century. Of course, there was no Y2K back then because, well, there was no computers. That was very much a millennial thing. He went on a trip to Poland then in 1900 and saw a woodworker making chevron-shaped helical gears and decided to buy the patent. And as you're maybe aware, that double helical shape may come up later on in this story. This inspired both his fortune and that future symbol, and he started manufacturing them with Moore's Automobile Company, or Mo Automobile Company. I don't know, my French is not so good. But he eventually became managing director and helped to modernize production at Moore's Automobile Company before World War I kicked off. Of course, there's that great big kind of thing that happened in Europe in 1914 to 1918, where there was a kind of a big fight went on. A lot of people punching each other. A little bit more serious than that, but that's not what this video is about. Of course, we do like to make some German jokes here, and I'm sure they'll be plentiful later on. During World War One, Citroen convinced the French government to let him build a massive munitions factory in Paris. This was back when the French decided to fight. And he applied the assembly line methods, which were inspired by Henry Ford, who really helped out the French during World War II, producing millions of shells and gaining a reputation as a production innovator. So after the war, with this experience, with capital he had and this infrastructure that had been built, he turned to his next ambitious product. He wanted to mass produce affordable automobiles for the French public. He basically was inspired by Henry Ford's workings and wanted to bring those to the French. In 1919, he had a visionary launch. André Citroën, willing to go out on a limb, and he founded Automotive Citroën in Paris on June 4th, 1919. That year, the company introduced its first car, the Type A, and it had an incredible 10 horses under the bonnet. We call it bonnet in Ireland and England, which is quite funny because a bonnet is obviously the thing that women wear. So I don't know if that's because women liked horses, men who are, or if that's where they hid horses back in the day. That's something maybe someone in the comments could let me know, or I'll frankly Google after this. Why is it called bonnet? And also the back of the car, the trunk of the car in America, called the boot in Ireland and England. So we've got the bonnet and the boot, which are clothing items. The trunk, I get, it's where you store things. That kind of makes sense. Doesn't really make sense either, does it? Under the hood, I guess is where I don't know. This is getting off topic. The Type A was a 1.3 litre, 10 to 18 horsepower, American-style assembly line built affordable car, which came very well equipped at its time, which kind of going forward would fit in with Citroen's lineup of wanting to make incredibly comfortable, luxurious cars affordable to the masses. They really did make, and we'll see this going forward, and if you watch Jay Leno's Garage, one of my mainstay channels here on YouTube, you'll see that they really did make affordable Rolls Royces, and that is not an overstatement. And if you've driven a Citroen, especially one from like the 80s, 90s, 2000s, or if you go way back, they really are just incredibly comfortable cars. I guess that's what the French overall did as well, because Peugeot are very much like that too. But yeah, by 1920, the factory was producing 100 cars a day in Qual de Javel, and made it the first mass production car line in Europe, which was really, really impressive. Into the 1920s, Citroen quickly expanded its lineup with models like the Type B2 in 1921 and the 5CV in 1922, which later became known as the Citroenette or Little Lemon. And in 1922, an airplane pilot wrote Citroen in the sky above Paris using smoke to advertise the brand. In 1925, the company also used another huge advertising tactic, and it used 250,000 light bulbs to light the Eiffel Tower up with its logo or company name. And the spectacle was so bright that Charles Lindbergh actually reportedly used the Eiffel Tower Citroen sign as a beacon when landing in Paris after his transatlantic flight from America. Unfortunately, they didn't have those lights available to light the Lindbergh baby, but that is a completely different story. But Citroen's flair for kind of this promotion reflected André's ambitions, I guess. And by the mid-decade, of the 1920s, Citroen was Europe's top car producer, outputting, and this is insane, 50,000 cars in 1924. Like, absolutely insane. And it wasn't a company as well that was just into assembly line productions. It also worked to prove that it could be the most innovative car company in the world. It focused very much on luxury and durability. and it organized adventurous expeditions. For example, in 1922, it fitted its car with Cagres half-track conversions, and it became the first motor car in history to cross the Sahara Desert in 1922. Absolutely insane. It was also followed by the Black Cruise, the Croisette Noire, which went across Africa in 1924, and then the Croisette Avant in Juin in the Yellow Cruise from Beirut to Beijing in 1931, hopefully not intended to be racist. But these journeys captivated the public and demonstrated that the cars were tough and could survive extreme conditions, even at their relatively, at the time, affordable prices. Technologically, Citroen scored a European first in 1924 with the Citroen Type B10, which was the continent's first car with an all-steel body. And this was actually produced in partnership with Edward Budd, an American engineer. Leading into the 30s then, Citroen continued with world's firsts. And as you may be aware from last week's episode about Mercedes, who produced the first really kind of usable diesel, or at least wantable diesel, a diesel that was good enough to have the actual performance. But Citroen, way back in 1933, introduced the world's first commercially available diesel car. They came up with the floating motor engine mounts, which reduced vibration in their cars and reduced the noise quite a bit, which was a first in the world of automotive. And they also offered a variety of body styles, from basic touring cars to luxurious coach-built variations. And basically, this set them up going into the 30s as a mainstay of luxury and artistic creativity and intriguing style, something that would become just, the thing you think of when you think of Citroen. You think of creative, kind of weird looking cars and comfort. And that was happening very early on in the very first decade of Citroen as a car company. By 1934, they came up with the Traction Avant revolution, which is where they unveiled a new car that was a landmark in automotive design. This was a sleek sedan, which was initially the 7A and 7CV models. And it was the world's first mass-produced car with front-wheel drive. And it pioneered this now standard unitary body, like monocoque chassis design, without a separate frame. So before then, most cars were built as body-on-frame design, something that pickup trucks still used for a long time. And they also pioneered in 1934 all four-wheel independent suspension, which was just incredible for that time. The Traction Avant's low-slung modern design and superior road holding compared to tall, rigid body-on-frame designs put Citroen way ahead of the competition, making it one of the most comfortable, affordable cars of the time. However, the costs of developing and tooling these revolutionary cars were incredible. And Citroen had demolished and rebuilt the Javel factory in record time to produce it, which put the company under massive strain financially. By the end of 1934, unfortunately, Citroen was bankrupt, and it was rescued by its largest creditor at the time, a company which you may be aware of, who I believe focus mainly on rating restaurants, Michelin. They took over ownership, and Citroen lost his independence. Unfortunately, shortly after that, in 1935, the founder of the company, André Citroën, would die. The company would continue on, as you're probably aware. Pierre-Jules Boulanger became the company's new managing director and later chairman, and ushered in an era of innovation remaining at its core while keeping the finances under wraps. Best of both worlds in reality, which I think, as we'll see going on through this company's history, was a good thing. They were able to keep cars affordable, keep costs down, while still keeping that core beauty of innovation. Despite the financial shakeup, Citroen kept innovating into the 30s. The Traction Avant evolved. into a long wheelbase 6-cylinder model called the 15.6 or the 15CV. And this was introduced as its flagship in 1938, which was famed for its quiet, smooth engine, which dubbed it the Queen of the Road. In fact, in 1936, Citroën had achieved a world first by showcasing a diesel Traction Avant in the 11UD at the Paris Salon, the first diesel passenger car, and Citroën began developing an economy people's car, codenamed the TPV, or Toute Petite Voiture. I know I've completely screwed that, and I'm sorry, but my French is un petit mal. And during this time, they developed that car, which would go on to become the 2CV. And they also expanded into light commercial vehicles such as the TUB, which launched in 1939, which was a front-wheel drive sliding door van. And this became a forerunner to the famous Type H that would go on later. In 1939, though, they started to build some cars that were built on alternative fuels due to some petrol rationing. Because there was just a tiny little thing that was kicking off. Basically, some very angry, strangely mustached Austrian dude had gotten a little bit of, anger over some stuff and was visiting Poland. And France were a little bit less concerned about building cars for le public at the time, and decided to put all of their effort, all of their attention, and all of their energy into swiftly surrendering. So we pick up our story, unlike Mercedes' story from last week, where that continued on through the war. We pick up our story after World War II, because during World War II, Citroen's Paris factory at Colle de Javel was destroyed, partially at least, by bombing. Legend holds, though, that Citroën employees hid the TPV prototype from the Nazis by disassembling it and scattering the parts, and then after the war, quickly and swiftly rebuilding it. Which makes sense, because if that wasn't the case, why would Hitler get Porsche to build the car that became the people's car? Oh my God, what if Hitler did find it and just made a rounder, lemony-shaped version? The pre-war Traction Avant was updated and put back on sale to get France moving again after the war. And at the 1946 Paris Motor Show, Citroën revealed the Type H van, though full production didn't kick off until 1947. And this was their robust front-wheel drive van that they had come up with, that they built from corrugated steel after the war, kind of reusing some of the other, some of the leftover parts that they had from military vehicles and from military housing and so on from during the war. And because of it being built from corrugated steel, it became known as the ribbed steel shed on wheels. I'm going to guess the British came up with that one because they're not great people, the British. I can say that. 800 years of occupation. The Type H would become ubiquitous in France, using it as delivery vans, ambulances, you name it. If it was a van, it would be used. And it remained in production until 1981 with minimal changes. But the post-war's most unique and iconic Citroën design was undoubtedly the 2CV, which was unveiled at the Paris Salon in October of 1948. Pierre Boulanger's team had engineered this ultra simple car to mobilize rural France and France as a whole. It was famously said to be designed to carry a farmer, 50 kilos of potatoes, and a basket of eggs across a ploughed field without breaking the eggs. And this became one of the most famous ways to sell the car back in the day. And in fact, Top Gear, the Grand Tour, I believe, recreated this by bringing some eggs across a field. It featured an air-cooled twin-cylinder engine, which was a 375cc originally, extremely soft, long-travel suspension, and a removable hammock-like seating arrangement. Its ridged, minimalist body and rollback canvas roof prioritized function over style, leading to nicknames like the umbrella on wheels or the upturned pram, which, if you look at the car, is, in fairness, not far off. Initial reaction to the car at the show were mixed, as you can imagine. Even looking at the car today, you can tell it took a unique style or a unique sense of creativity to really see it, but it struck a chord with the public, who saw the function of it as far more important than how it looked, because the looks were striking and divisive, to say the least. Demand for this outstripped supply well into the 1950s. Like, this became a mega hit for Citroën and for France as an automobile overall. It gained millions of people, frankly, like the Beetle in Germany and here in Mexico, actually. The 2CV really did put the French on the road. Millions of these were sold. It became a cultural icon. And it became the affordable car for France until the 1950s. It stayed in production for 42 years, from 1948 to 1990. Over 5 million 2CVs and its variants were built in France and abroad. And this little Citroen's impact was felt globally. It was licensed to be built in assembly and assembled in countries from the UK and Slough to Argentina, and it remained a beloved, charming and indestructible, simple car. In fact, one that we'll talk about later on in this series will be obviously Volkswagen and the Beetle. And the Volkswagen Beetle was built here in Mexico until 2003. And I mean, the original Beetle was built until 2003 here. And the 2CV very much became Citroen's version of that. Citroen in the late 40s would focus very much on light commercial vehicles as well. Alongside the 2CV, Citroen rolled out the van version of the 2CV in the late 40s, but officially in 1951, I think it went on sale. And this became very popular with tradesmen and farmers and so on. And then the Type H van went on sale in 1948 and quickly became, very, very popular throughout France. And Citroen's range, the 1940s ranged massively. It wasn't a huge lineup, but just the variation was massive, from the van to the 2CV to obviously the very, very advanced Traction Avant. And it was kind of a duality of France, if you want, at that time, of, the wealthy coming back, investments coming back, and the upper class wanting a very, upper class to the 2CV, and the plebeians, if you want, the people in the impoverished, the working class, getting access to cars. So Citroen's lineup really did reflect that kind of duality of the French in post-war France. In 1955, though, Citroen would make its next big move. It unveiled the DS19. It was a legend. And this car really cemented Citroen's legend as an innovator. So it launched the DS in October of 1955 at the Paris Motor Show. And it was pronounced in French as the Déesse, or the goddess, and felt, frankly, like, compared to any other car of the time. It was styled by an Italian sculptor that I'm sure we will mention tons and tons of times throughout this series going forward, especially as we talk about more of the Italian brands and cars. Bertoni, Flaminio Bertoni. And it was engineered by French André Rebirth. Definitely getting that name wrong. But it featured wind-cheating aerodynamic body design and a futuristic, uncluttered interior. Most innovative, though, was, of course, its hydropneumatic suspension, which was an automated self-leveling system that used hydraulic fluid and air pressure and gave the car an uncanny suspension ride. Just, if you've ever been in one of these, it's absolutely incredible even today. It just floats down the road, but not like the kind of floaty American car, which is great as well, don't get me wrong, but it was, properly planted, but would just float over things. Absolutely incredible. The nickname for it, as you can imagine, became the magic carpet. And it, was able to lower and higher itself. Also, you can change the tire without a jack using only the suspension. It also introduced power-assisted brakes and steering, a semi-automatic gearbox with no clutch pedal, and was the first mass-production car with front disc brakes, beating most competitors by years. The public's response was ecstatic, and Citroen took 12,000 orders on the first day and 80,000 orders over the 10-day show in total, which is just insane. That was a record for car orders at the time, which I believe stood for over a decade, well into the 60s. The DS became just an icon and really showed that when the French weren't busy surrendering, being rude to tourists, or making smelly cheese, they could really do something brilliant. I would say that the DS and the Baguette, along with hairy armpitted women, are probably the three biggest things that France have given us. And also their I would say those are the biggest things. Probably one of the most famous things in Citroen's history was in 1962, when there was an assassination attempt on President de Gaulle of France. And he survived one of several assassination attempts thanks to the Citroen's advanced hydro-pneumatic suspension, which allowed him to escape from this running on flat tires after bullets had pierced them. Absolutely insane, and a peak point in Citroen's history, which I'm sure I've probably gotten wrong or fallen into lore, so correct me if I'm wrong below. In the 1950s, though, they did continue to broaden their lineup. With the DS's appeal, they also brought in the ID19, which was a lower cost variant of the DS with less power and a simpler hydraulic system, which was ideal for taxis and middle class buyers. The workhorse T-Type H van continued to thrive, and it was joined by a 2CV based diesel van, the Fourgonette, I think it was called. Which was used for delivering those stunning baguettes and mail as well, importantly, I guess, across villages. And Citroen also started to tentatively go to those people who had bailed them out, the Americans, and started selling into America as well. The DS and the ID were sold in the US and Canada in very, very small numbers by people that just really love these. In fact, most of the dealerships were just kind of pegged on to petrol stations and, people's workshops and stuff like that. It wasn't like a proper dealer network like Ford or, Ferrari or anyone else, or Fiat would build throughout the 1950s and 60s in America after the war. This was very much just like enthusiasts were like, oh yeah, I have a shop around the corner and I have a Citroen dealership out back. So that put off a lot of people from buying these, but that was essentially how it was sold. It was a sparse dealer network. Their export efforts extended to kind of assembling cars abroad as well. In 1958, a plant in Slough in England started building them, and then in Belgium as well, and in Argentina, they started building these. Fun fact, in 1958, Citroen created the 2CV Sahara, a special 2-engine twin-drive axle 4x4 version of the 2CV intended for rugged use in the colonies. The French colonies, obviously, but only 694 of these were ever made. By the end of the 1950s, Citroen had established itself as just this absolutely iconic brand in comfort and creativity, making very, very divisive but beloved designs. And in the late 1950s as well, they would get themselves into something that they would become iconic for as well throughout the years, sport, namely rally. Their remarkable suspension, they began to find success in rally competitions, and in 1959, an entry-level Citroen ID19, which was the cheaper middle class, if you want, derivative of the DS, shocked the racing world by winning the Monte Carlo. The Citroen, which was driven by Paul Coltelloni, was excelling in icy conditions, rough roads. This victory, along with an overall European Rally Championship title, really went on to help Citroën sell to the masses, who obviously has a huge publicity boost and gave French people a lot of pride. In the 1960s, off the back of the success of the DS and the Type H van and just this publicity from motorsport and so on, Citroën spent a lot of its time focusing on rolling out different lines and trying to fill the gaps in its marketing, allowing them to sell to a variety of marketplaces. And in 1961, they launched the Ami 6, which was a quirky, well, compared to even their own Citroens, a quirky family sedan based on the 2CV chassis, which was built with an enlarged, a massive 602cc engine. I have to say, this is one funny thing about Citroen compared to like last week we were talking about Mercedes and some of the American companies I'm going to cover soon. You know, the massive 602cc engines, 1 litre engines, 1.3 litre huge engines they would put into these Citroens compared to a 21 litre Mercedes or, you know, a 6 litre Mercedes at the time. But yeah, this car anyway had a 602cc engine. Most notable feature of this was its rear window, which was like steeply slanted in reverse. It was concave to keep it clean and to give more headroom in the back. And it was an instant hit in France. And then they followed that with a station wagon variant in 1964. And to further capitalize on the 2CV's popularity, Citroën then introduced the Diane in 1967, which was intended as a more modern, slightly upscaled 2CV variant with a hatchback rear. And the Marais was unveiled in 1968, which added a little sprinkle of whimsy to the Citroen lineup. It was a light utility beach buggy with a plastic ABS body on a 2CV platform and became a favorite of those people that every single market these days is looking for. Your Clarksons, if you will. Farmers. That's outdoorsy hippie types basically bought these in droves. By 1969, the Ami 8 had arrived with a smoother fastback design to replace the Ami 6, and these models kept Citroën strong in the economy segment thanks to assembly operations abroad as well, helping them to penetrate the European market, Africa and Latin America. In fact, France penetrated the European market more heavily than the Germans had during World War II. That wasn't even a funny joke. It was just a terrible point. Just brought up the war for no reason. And I think, frankly, I should be ashamed of myself. Let me know in comments if you're ashamed of me too. Citroen cars were built in Chile and Argentina in the 1960s, and the Argentine 3CV was essentially an Ami 8 with local tweaks. And each of these cars, though, importantly, maintained that ethos of innovation and comfort. This is one thing I do love about the Citroen situation, unlike Chrysler, Mercedes, or some of the other companies we'll talk about, where they get bought out and they kind of lose their soul, their core. Citroen very much kept that in the 1960s, even throughout a lot of corporate changes. For example, 1963 to 1965, Citroen took a controlling stake in Panhard, which was known for its advanced small cars. So Citroen took that over. And this was aimed at bolstering Citroen's range with their expertise. However, Citroen's own models overlapped with this range as well, which was a bit of an issue. And by 1967, Panhard had ceased car production. But the point of that is, at least in these acquisitions, they were thinking about things that would synergize with their core ambitions instead of, trying to just quickly grab market share like Auto Union purchase. But Citroen was also willing to create stuff that just wouldn't fit into this wheelhouse. And one interesting fact that I bet a lot of people aren't aware of is that in 1968, Citroën decided to buy out another company that we will definitely cover here, an interesting company that I bet you didn't know was French owned for a while. The Italian sports automaker that would go on to run Ferrari engines and so on. They bought this to obtain high performance engine technology, which would soon yield the Citroen sadomasochism. Sorry, just SM, nothing to do with, my bad. Citroen was also engaged in an international venture for rotary engine development, the Co-Motor, a 1967 partnership with NSU of Germany, to build the Wankel rotary engine in 1967. So basically in the 1960s, Citroen built a ton of prototype vehicles to use this Wankel rotary engine, such as the M35 in 1969, which was a small coupe built on the Ami chassis, and it had a single rotary engine with hydropneumatic suspension. 267 of these were made to give loyal customers and give to loyal customers and gather real world data. These were experiments. But again, what I do love about this is that all of these were Citroen's attempts to make more innovative cars, more comfortable and more passionate cars, instead of just constantly looking at, corner cutting. At the turn of the decade, Citroen unveiled two major new models simultaneously. In 1970, they introduced the Citroen SM, which was a swift Grand Touring coupe, which was born from that Maserati partnership. And that Maserati, that SM housed a ginormous, absolutely monstrous 2.7 litre V6 engine, which was front wheel drive. It was like a GT car. And it featured some of Citroen's most advanced technology, hydropneumatic suspension, plus the new Diravi speed adjusting power steering that automatically centered itself. The S&M could cruise, just like a lot of S&M men like to cruise. Don't know where that was going. Gonna just move swiftly on. It could cruise at 200 kilometers per hour, which was insane in 1970, and was massively loved for its blend of comfort and performance. And in 1972, it was named Motor Trend's Car of the Year in America, which is insane given, its standing in America was still tiny, obviously, and still is, I think, to this day. Just a few months after the SM, Citroen finally bridged a gap in its range, introducing the GS, which was a medium-sized family car that sat between the 2CV Ami and the DS, the big car. It had a 1 litre flat 4 air-cooled engine and hydropneumatic suspension, which finally brought that kind of hydropneumatic suspension to the masses in this smaller package. It was an aerodynamic 5-door car with all-round disc brakes. And because of this and the suspension and everything else, it became the European Car of the Year in 1971. Like, all of this pushing made, obviously, Citroen a hugely popular and widely selling car in Europe. Unfortunately, a lot of this didn't span over to America, but a massively popular car in Europe, and it became a critic's choice car. The early 1970s were arguably Citroen at its peak in terms of innovation. Like, this was a time where innovation overshadowed financial gain in basically all measures, which was incredible. From its 2CV to its practical GS and luxury DS and the exotic high-performance SM, no other car maker had like this type of diversity or reputation for like engineering, really pushing the boundaries. Well, yeah, throughout the 1970s, it continued on down that path. And in 1974, it won in its class at the grueling London Sahara Munich World Cup Rally, outlasting many newer competitors as it ran cars that it had developed in the 1960s, and it was beating most of them. So this gave them like a proper world rally pedigree, which would continue on. Unfortunately, though, these bold ventures and pushing the limits on its whole lineup would put them under a lot of financial strain. The SM and GS in particular had put the company in a very precarious financial situation. In 1973, Citroen launched the GS Birotor, a birotary Wankel engine variant of the GS, hoping to create an upscale high-tech variant that would get them, some more wealthy buyers and expand their range to where they could make some more profitable cars. It debuted, though, just as an oil embargo hit, and the Wankel engine's high fuel economy and high cost doomed it from the start, which meant that basically all of the cost of innovation on it essentially went down the drain. Only 847 GS Birotors were ever produced in the 2 years before they had to abruptly cancel it in 1975. And they even attempted to buy back the car and scrap many sold cars in order to basically get some cash for them. But Citroen's finances were now dire. The company had also invested in developing more models, like a forthcoming CX, which hadn't released yet. And it was carrying losses of the Maserati subsidiary. The Italian company had losses as well. But by 1974, Citroen's debt sheet was basically unsustainable. Michelin, after decades of ownership, decided to pull the plug on its part of car manufacturing and went just all in on tires and raiding restaurants. And that year, Citroen sold Maserati to De Tomaso, you may know, another company that we definitely will cover at some point here. And in 1974, it negotiated finally a partnership to save itself from its debt with its main rival, Peugeot. It also, in 1974, pulled the plug on the small market share that it had gained in North America, in the USA, and completely just pulled out of America. It had been selling the DS and SM there, even though the SM was like car of the year from Motor Trend and so on. It just decided to pull out, mainly because of the financial issues, but it was kind of pushed over the edge by new safety regulations from the US, which meant that it couldn't just export its cars for sales there. They would have to be massively adapted. And they decided it just wasn't worth their money or time. In May of 1975, Citroen once again filed for bankruptcy or bankruptcy protection. The French government stepped in and pushed for Peugeot, the Peugeot SA group, to take over. That they would help with some backing and kind of pushed for this to happen. And in 1976, Peugeot acquired an 89.95 and 90% stake in Citroen, effectively merging the two into the new PSA group. This merger created France's largest automaker, and under PSA, Citroen was maintained as a separate mark, but behind the scenes, many resources were now shared. Peugeot's engines, a development of future models would also be coordinated. For instance, the next Citroen car, the Citroen Visa, would just use Peugeot's engines, and unfortunately for Citroen as well going forward, Peugeot would very much regulate the lineup to ensure that none of Citroen's cars overlapped with Peugeot's lineup, which made it very, very difficult in terms of innovation and so on. The late 1970s basically saw Citroen under new management that strangled it, if you want, for quite a while. And all of their ambitious products like the Wankel engine and so on was scrapped. Citroen was essentially forced to take a more pragmatic financial approach. Thankfully, a swan song of the bygone era was released just before the takeover by Peugeot with the Citroen CX, which was a streamlined executive fastback, which was designed to replace the DS. Thankfully, this did get out just before the takeover and was therefore continued on in production. The CX had a transverse engine and kept the hydropneumatic suspension. It won European Car of the Year in 1975 and became a classic of the Citroen lineup, especially in the long wheelbase prestige version, and became the favoured car of heads of state in Europe and especially in France. And then After the PSA takeover, smaller models filled out the range, basically. The Citroen LN arrived in 1976, essentially a three-door Peugeot 104 with Citroen badging on it, very uninspired. This was the entry-level model from then on. The 78 model Citroen Visa came out, a five-door Super Mini with Peugeot's input, was released as well, which kind of combined some of Citroen's quirky styling touches with Peugeot's relatively dull engineering. But the Visa was notable for having a very comfortable PRN, or, park reverse neutral satellite switching gear around the steering wheel. Citroen also launched the LNA in 1978, which was an updated LN with a bigger engine, and continued niche vehicles like the Mehari, the 4x4 in 1979. But yeah, they thankfully had their bigger lineup, but other than that, they were trying to just have some slight kind of sparkle of that Citroen innovation that they had early on in their lineup throughout this Peugeot ownership and under Peugeot ownership. They could do much less of it, but they still sparkled a little bit with that. I think what would save the Citroen brand, though, was during the oil crisis in the late 1970s, which caused fuel to be very, very expensive. The still produced 2CV kind of saved the Citroen brand in many ways. A lot of buyers went to buy the Citroen 2CV because of its fuel economy and affordability. From 1980 onwards, they brought out the 2CV Charleston, which was a bicolor version, and they kept the model fresh in that way. By 1979, the PSA turnaround had made the combined company profitable again, proving the merger a success and setting the stage for a rejuvenated Citroen into the 1980s. So in reality, what's kind of crazy is that a lot of the Citroen ethos and the Citroen innovation would have been killed off in this mainly Peugeot-run merger if it wasn't for the oil crisis kind of giving a resurgence. So yeah, it's just crazy to think like it was kind of almost killed off, but it gained its own because of that 1960s ingenuity, pulling it back into the 1980s, which is just insane in many ways, and really shows that the innovation of André Citroën from the early days of the company paid dividends and kept the company name alive. In the 1980s, Citroën would get definitely, I would say, a much more boxy and boring style enforced on it by its overlords at Peugeot. But thankfully, what they lost in style, they kept in innovation. And the 80s proved to be a time where they could still prove themselves as quirky innovators. Citroën entered the 1980s, transitioning away from its older models into some of the newer models under that Peugeot leadership. The boxy Visa hatchback gained sportier trims, though, like the Chrono Rally version and the GT, and even an all-wheel version called the Visa Mille Pistes for rallying. In 1982, it released the BX, a pivotal family car for upper medium segment. It had angular styling from Bertone, a true to Citroën form type car. It had the hydropneumatic suspension once again, giving it a floaty yet dynamic feel to match that kind of quirky angular looks. It was light thanks to its plastic bumpers and tailgates. And it came with Peugeot-derived engine, which actually made it more reliable than its original Citroën counterparts, and especially its Maserati counterparts. And the BX was a commercial sensation, selling over 2 million units during its run, which was incredible given its class. In a small car class, the AX was introduced in 1986. The AX was a subcompact designed for lightness and fuel efficiency, and it even had an eco model that could achieve 3.5 litres per 100 kilometres, which was massive in the 80s. Despite its utilitarian goals, though, the AX still offered some of Citroën's comfort in class and became popular in Europe and Asia for this, essentially. And the AX version, because of this comfort, was even built under license in China for a long time. At the top end, Citroën finally bid farewell to the CX in 1989, replacing it with the futuristic XM sedan as its new flagship. The XM was wedge-shaped, which was very 80s. Some of you are probably aware of the very wedge-shaped Countach and so on. And it updated its hydroactive suspension, which then became electronically controlled for ride firmness, and once again went on to be European Car of the Year in 1980. With these models, Citroën was very much showcasing that it could take the best of both worlds. And I think this is very much on top of fuel crisis of the 1970s what saved it. It became the car company under the PSA branch that could use its innovative flair to show off what it could do while still becoming profitable. And once again, it was Rally where they would get to showcase a lot of this flair too, as the BX4TC was introduced in 1986, a wild turbocharged four-wheel drive version of the BX, which joined the Group B category of the World Rally Championship. Unfortunately, it was uncompetitive and only a few hundred were made for homologation, making it a rare collector's item, but nonetheless, it was a beauty to behold. It was a brilliant car to watch. But they did have some success in rally in the 1980s to continue on Citroen's heritage in this field. In 1989, Citroen won the Faro Rally, which led them into the 1990s and getting into rally in a big way when they won the Paris-Dakar Rally in 1991. And this, frankly, had all given Citroën some rope with which to play with. And in the 1990s, they were now in full flow with this new merger. And it felt like the oppressive times of the 70s were well and truly gone, as the 80s it had found its rhythm. And in 1991, Citroën launched the ZX, a new compact family car positioned between the AX and BX. And the ZX had a more conventional design, omitting the hydropneumatic suspension to reduce cost, but introducing a clever sliding rear bench seat to maximize cargo and legroom. And it proved versatile, spawning estate and sporty coupe versions in the ZX 16V hot hatch, which became massively admired throughout France and the world. And significantly, the ZX was also produced in the Chinese market as well. The Dongfeng Citroen Fukang, which was brilliantly named, was the local built ZX for the Chinese market. And it went on sale in 1992. And by 1994, full production was underway, and it made them a strong presence in China. Frankly, the Chinese market as well became a mainstay of Citroen's lineup and probably helped to keep them massively profitable throughout the 80s and 90s and give them more of that leeway to produce cars that they would. For example, Bertone penned car was the Xantia, which brought back hydropneumatic suspension once again for Citroen's mid-size offering. And they also introduced active anti-roll bars in this to help with roll in the corners. The Xantia has captured some of that early DS comfort and sharpness and brought some of that old Citroen, feel back to the lineup. Obviously in a very different way. It's not exactly the same. And the company felt like it was getting back to its roots, albeit in 1990s trim by this stage. And in 1990, they finally retired the 2CV, with the last ever 2CV rolling off the production lines in Portugal. Of course, this is probably the point where a lot of you watching, I know me, for example, started to maybe fall in love with Citroen. Because in 1996, Citroen launched the Citroen Saxo, which became a mainstay for teenagers wanting their first car in the 2000s. But it was a 3-door and 5-door super mini developed on the basis of the Peugeot 106. The Saxo, though, quickly found favour among young drivers, including as a base for making it a rally car. This was where I loved it from. It was a rally car in those days. It was offered in lively trims like the VTS, which was a 1.6 litre 16 valve hot hatch, and it gained a cult following. In fact, the Saxo became so popular among young people and among rally enthusiasts that by the 2000s, it was essentially uninsurable for anyone under 25 in the UK and Ireland. For family buyers, there was the larger market versions of Peugeots. So Citroen took the 1994 large minivans from Peugeot and had the Evasion come out, which wasn't nothing to do with their taxes. It was actually what their car was called, or the Synergy in some markets. This was their full-size MPV that they built in a joint venture with Fiat. But a bigger impact came from a car that I'm sure you're aware of. One car that I know all car lovers just dream about at night. The 1996 Citroen Berlingo, which was their small car-based van, which was actually just a massively popular car for Citroen. And then the Multispace, which was the passenger variant of this. It was so popular and long-lasting that it went on to the 2000s, I think the late 2000s, before they got rid of it. But its second generation even won the Euro NCAP safety awards for just how brilliantly it was built. And by 1997, Citroen replaced the ZX with the Citroen Zara, a tiny hatchback and wagon that was so stylish. It spawned the Zara Coupe. And then, of course, one of my absolute favorites, one of potentially, depending on how you feel, the most beautiful or ugliest cars in the world. It was a compact SUV with an egg-shaped profile. Genuinely, this is one of the cars when I think of Citroen, I think of first, would you believe? Because it was so divisive in its styling. But yeah, just Citroen really just kept on with its roots here. This is what I love about the Citroen company, that they kept this lineup going of innovation and quirkiness. And unlike Toyota and Honda and, you know, a lot of the Japanese and American and even German manufacturers, it wasn't afraid to make cars that were divisive and very much harked back to André Citroën. And because of that, it became the best-selling minivan of the 2000s worldwide, not just in Europe. And this is where I think the peak for people my age of Citroen came about. Obviously, in the past, it was the 2CV, the DS, all of the old cars that really brought Citroen about. But for you and me watching, if you're in your 30s, early 40s, what you probably remember is leading Citroen into the 2000s with utter dominance in World Rally Championship, with the Zara WRC in 2003. And the results of this car were nothing short of spectacular. Citroen entered the World Rally Championship as a manufacturer in 2003 with that Zara WRC, and they won the Manufacturers' Championship in 2003 on its first attempt. Like, that's utterly spectacular. Their lead driver, Sebastian Loeb, went on to cinch a record-breaking nine consecutive WRC Drivers' Championships from 2004 to 2012 in Citroen cars, and the C4 WRC and finally the DS3 WRC. He went on to drive all of those, and Citroen amassed 8 World Rally Championship manufacturers titles in that period, 2003 to 2005, and then from 2008 to 2012. The run made Loeb the most successful rally driver ever and made Citroen one of the most successful rally championship. So if you're watching this because you remember Citroen for their rally heritage, please let me know in the comments, because I know that's what I thought of them as and that is also why they were so hard to insure in the 2000s, because obviously from 2003 to 2012 they were so successful in rally that every young boy wanted to be in Victoria Beckham, but also wanted to be in a Citroen, which made them just uninsurable because young men just will. And this gave Citroen a huge boost on the commercial front as well, and it decided to overhaul its lineup during the 2000s. The longtime model XM bowed out in in 2000 and was replaced by the C5 in 2001, a comfortable mid-sized liftback and wagon that served as both the Xantia and XM successor at the time, in effect. And the C5 also featured hydropneumatic suspension, the last ever Citroen, or at least the last midsize, maybe the last Citroen, I'm sure I have that noted somewhere, to do so. And the new technology that they would bring in also can now be found on a ton of cars. Citroen once again showing its innovation, where it led with technology like rain sensing wipers, which were debuted in the Citroen C3 in 2002, which was a 5-door Super Mini, which had retro hints of the 2CV in its design. It was a massive hit, spawning variants like the Pluriel in 2003, which was a convertible, which was such a weird design that also, I think, carried into the Peugeot CC as well. Citroen introduced the C2 in 2003, which was a sporty 3-door comparison to the C3. And the executive class, Citroen brought out the C6 in 2005. This was a beautiful, beautiful car. I remember driving a couple of these. This was a low-slung luxury sedan inspired by the CX and DS with a concave rear window and an active hydro-pneumatic suspension. The C6 even included modern touches from that DS-esque innovativeness, like a heads-up display and lane departure warning. Again, just showing that Citroen was willing to kind of continue to bring on that heritage of innovation. Although a niche product, the C6 became the official car for French presidents, carrying on from the DS and, going back to how de Gaulle had used one back in the day. And perhaps the most significant branding move was the decision then to reintroduce the DS name, but in a very different way. So the DS was not going to be used for a single model, but instead for an entire sub-brand. So in 2009, celebrating Citroen's 90th anniversary, the company revealed the DS3, a chic upscale hatchback that was kind of supposed to be sporty and compete with BMW's Mini of the time. And this was then given to Loeb with his WRC success in a DS3 WRC. And this launched the DS4, DS5 as their kind of sporty higher end models to sell to younger clients and wider audiences that were interested in these models. And Citroen would obviously start to electrify throughout the late 2010s into the 2020s. And the only thing that became unfortunate for Citroen is that it got rolled into the Stellantis group over the last few years, which inevitably will make it a dull, boring, and ultimately unreliable car. But what I like about Citroen is that even in this Stellantis era, even in this modern era, they're still quirky, comfortable, and willing to go back to their roots of trying things that no one in a normal corporate group would want. They had the crossover coupe C4 in 2020, which wasn't anything spectacular in terms of, wowing the world, but it was still notable for bringing back that retro kind of fastback look, but in modern form. So it falls in line with Citroen's history of not wanting to be boxed in and basically making things that would either just be absolutely quirky in style or completely forget about form and focus 100% on function. Look, I think that what I like about what Citroen has become is it has kind of become itself in the past, but thankfully is letting someone else do its accountancy. Citroen is an incredible brand that, while maybe doesn't have the class or cachet of a Mercedes, a Ferrari, a Maserati even, and doesn't have a huge amount of models to really draw from, which is why this is probably a bit of a more sparse episode of Storytime. Each of its models has its own little thing, its own little quirk. quirk, its own little feature. And I think as car lovers, that's what we love, don't we? Like, if you buy an old car, only you can start it. Only you can drive it properly. Anyone else sits in it, it's a bit of a mess. But you love it because of that. And each and every Citroen throughout its sparse history has had that little quirk, that little feeling. And that's what I loved about Citroen, apart from rallying the Saxo before being unable to insure them. Citroen sits on its own legacy, and it's brilliant because of that. And I think this is the least prepared story time so far, and I'm going to prepare the next one better. But I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to subscribe on your way out the door to drive your very own Citroën.